If you are drawn to stories of love, mystery, and magic, subscribe and let the night begin. The scent of blood and crushed jasmine was the last thing I expected to find in the Queen's private garden. I stood frozen, my breath catching in a throat that felt suddenly too tight, as the stranger's blade pressed a cold, thin line against my jugular. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a god carved from the very shadows that were supposed to protect me. In the silence between us, the only sound was the frantic drum of my heart, and his low, ragged breathing that smelled of sea salt and cedarwood. "You were not supposed to be here, Princess," he whispered, and for a moment I didn't know if he meant the garden or this life I was so desperately trying to escape. "Welcome to the city of silver and silk, where every promise is a coin and every heart is a secret waiting to be spent. My name is Elara, and tonight was supposed to be the beginning of my end, the night my father, the Sultan, announced my union to a man whose heart was as cold as the marble floors of the Great Hall. But as I looked into the eyes of the man holding the knife, eyes the color of a storm-tossed ocean, I realized that destiny is not a path we walk, but a fire we survive. The palace of Alcazar was a labyrinth of luxury, a place where the walls were covered in gold leaf, and the air was thick with the heavy perfume of burning out. To the world, I was the jewel of the desert, a silent prize to be traded for alliances and peace. But inside, I was a storm, trapped in a vessel of silk and tradition, longing for a wind that would finally carry me beyond the high sandstone walls. It was the night of the Crescent Festival, a time when the moon hung like a silver scythe over the dunes, and the entire city was alive with the sound of flutes and the rhythm of drums. I had slipped away from the banquet, the weight of my sapphire-encrusted gown feeling like armor I no longer wanted to wear. The private garden was my only sanctuary, a place of ancient olive trees and fountains that wept cool water into basins of turquoise tile. But tonight, the sanctuary had been breached. The stranger moved with a predatory grace, his dark cloak swirling around him like smoke. When he finally lowered the blade, he didn't move away. He stayed close, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. His hand, calloused and strong, reached out to catch a stray lock of my hair, his touch lingering just a second too long to be accidental. "Why do you not scream, little bird?" he asked, his voice a rich, dark velvet that sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the jagged scar that ran across his collarbone, disappearing beneath the rough linen of his tunic. "Because a scream would bring the guards," I replied, my own voice steadier than I felt. "And I think I would rather die by your hand than live another hour in theirs." He let out a low, bitter laugh, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air between us. "You are Elara, the Sultan's pride," he said, his gaze searching my face as if looking for a map he had lost long ago. "They say you are made of moonlight and glass, but I see the fire beneath the surface." He told me his name was Kaelen, a name that tasted of foreign lands and forbidden things. He was a shadow from the borderlands, a man who lived where the sand met the sea, a place of lawless beauty and wild magic. He shouldn't have been able to scale the palace walls, let alone reach the inner sanctum, yet here he was, standing in the moonlight like a ghost from a story I wasn't supposed to hear. As the music from the banquet drifted over the walls, a haunting melody of strings and heartbeat, Kaelen took a step back, melting into the shadows of a flowering pomegranate tree. "Tomorrow, your father signs the treaty," he said, his voice fading into the rustle of leaves. "If you want to see what lies beyond the horizon, meet me when the third bell tolls at the western gate." And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his skin and a small silver coin pressed into the palm of my hand. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, the silk sheets of my bed feeling like sandpaper against my skin. My thoughts were a chaotic whirl of Kaelen's eyes and the dangerous promise in his voice. For 20 years, I had been the perfect daughter, the silent observer of my own life. But as the first light of dawn began to purple the sky, I realized that the coin in my hand wasn't just silver, it was a key. The next morning, the palace was a hive of frantic activity. Servants hurried through the corridors with trays of fruit and honeyed wine, and the smell of roasting lamb filled the courtyards. My father sat on his throne of ivory, his face a mask of stern authority as he prepared to greet the delegation from the north. Beside him sat Prince Jarek, my husband-to-be, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, and whose touch made my skin crawl with an instinctive revulsion. Throughout the day, Jarek watched me with the possessive gaze of a man who had just bought a rare artifact. He spoke of our future as if it were a ledger of assets and territories, his voice a monotonous drone that made the walls feel even closer. I smiled when I was expected to smile, and I nodded when I was expected to agree, but my spirit was already at the western gate, waiting for the sound of the bell. As dusk began to settle over the city, turning the white stone to gold, the tension in my chest became almost unbearable. I retired to my chambers early, claiming a headache brought on by the heat. My ladies-in-waiting whispered among themselves as they brushed my hair, their voices like the buzzing of flies. When the final lamp was extinguished and the palace fell into its restless sleep, I traded my silks for a plain, dark-hooded cloak and slipped into the night. The western gate was a massive structure of iron and oak, guarded by men whose shadows stretched long and thin under the flickering torches. I moved through the servants' passages, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was sure it would wake the dead. Every shadow seemed to reach for me. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a shout of betrayal. When the third bell finally tolled, its deep, resonant bronze vibration echoing through the silent streets, I reached the small postern door hidden behind a stack of empty crates. My hands were shaking as I pushed it open, the iron hinges groaning in protest. Outside, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of the open desert and the freedom I had only ever dreamed of. I stood for a moment, paralyzed by the vastness of the world beyond the walls. The dunes stretched out like a sea of frozen waves, silvered by the light of the stars. And there, leaning against a weathered stone pillar, was Kaelen. He didn't say a word. He simply reached out his hand, and as I took it, I felt a spark of electric recognition that told me my life would never, ever be the same again. The desert at night is not silent. It breathes with a low, rhythmic hum that vibrates through the soles of your feet. As we rode away from the city, the twin moons of our kingdom rose high, casting long, distorted shadows of our horses against the rippling sand. Kaelen rode with an effortless grace, his body moving in perfect synchronization with his stallion, while I clung to the saddle, the wind whipping my hair into a dark storm behind me. We didn't speak for hours, the distance between us and the palace walls growing until the sapphire domes were nothing more than a cluster of stars on the horizon. When we finally stopped at a hidden oasis, where the water was so clear it looked like liquid diamonds, the silence felt heavy with everything we hadn't said. Kaelen helped me down from my mount, his hands lingering on my waist, the heat of his palms soaking through the thin fabric of my cloak. I felt a strange, dizzying pull toward him, a magnetic force that made me want to lean into his strength, and forget that I was a fugitive in my own land. "Why did you really come for me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the rustle of the palm fronds. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable in the moonlight, and for a moment I saw a flash of something that looked like grief. "I didn't come for a Princess Elara," he said, his voice rough and low. "I came for the girl who used to write poems in the margins of her history books and hide them in the cracks of the garden wall." I gasped, my heart skipping a beat as I realized he wasn't just a stranger. He was the boy from the stories my nurse used to tell, the one who had disappeared into the wastes years ago. Over the next few days, as we traveled deeper into the unnamed lands, the tension between us stretched until it was a physical thing, a wire pulled taut. We shared meals of dried dates and cold water under the blazing sun, and at night we huddled near small fires, the flickering light dancing over his sharp features. I watched the way he moved, the way he scanned the horizon with the instinct of a wolf, and I found myself memorizing the curve of his jaw and the way his brow furrowed when he thought I wasn't looking. There was a wildness in him that called to the hidden parts of my soul, a hunger that mirrored my own. One evening, beneath a sky so crowded with stars it felt like it might collapse, Kaelen reached out and traced the line of my collarbone with his thumb. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it set my skin on fire. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he murmured, his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my lips. "Like what?" I asked, my voice trembling with a longing I could no longer hide. "Like I'm the answer to every prayer you've ever whispered," he replied. And then he kissed me, a slow, devastating collision that tasted of desperation and salt. It was a kiss that broke the world, a moment of pure, unfiltered connection that made the palace and its rules feel like a distant, fading dream. But as I pulled him closer, my fingers tangling in his dark hair, I felt the cold metal of a locket hidden beneath his shirt. When my hand brushed against it, he stiffened and pulled away, a wall of ice slamming back down between us. He wouldn't tell me what was inside the locket, only that some secrets were meant to stay buried in the sand. The atmosphere changed instantly, the tenderness replaced by a sharp, jagged edge of suspicion. I realized then that while I was running toward freedom, Kaelen was running toward a ghost. We reached the hidden city of Elara on the 7th day, a place carved directly into the red rock of the canyon, where the air smelled of iron and ancient stone. It was a sanctuary for the lost and the lawless, a city where identities were shed like old skin. But as we entered the main square, I saw the posters pinned to the walls, my own face staring back at me, a king's ransom offered for my return. My father wouldn't stop until he found me, not because he loved me, but because I was the key to the treaty that would secure his legacy. And Kaelen, the man I had begun to trust with my life, was talking in low, urgent tones to a group of men whose eyes were as cold as Jarek's. I watched from the shadows as gold changed hands, a heavy purse of coins passing from a hooded figure to Kaelen. My stomach lurched, a cold, sickening dread spreading through my veins. Had this all been a ruse? An elaborate play to lure the princess away from her guards so she could be sold to the highest bidder? I wanted to run, to disappear into the labyrinthine streets of Elara, but Kaelen's eyes found mine across the crowded square. There was no guilt in his gaze, only a grim, unwavering determination that terrified me more than any blade. "Elara, wait!" he called out. But I was already turning, my heart shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, ducking into a narrow alleyway that smelled of damp earth. But I wasn't fast enough. A hand clamped over my mouth and a familiar, chilling voice whispered in my ear. "Did you really think you could escape your destiny, my love?" It was Jarek. He hadn't waited for the guards. He had followed us himself, a hunter who enjoyed the chase as much as the kill. He pulled me back against his chest, his grip like iron, as Kaelen emerged from the shadows at the end of the alley, his sword drawn and his eyes burning with a dark, terrible fire. The cold steel of Jarek's dagger pressed against my ribs, a sharp reminder that my flight had only led me from one cage to another. Jarek's laugh was a dry, rattling sound in the cramped alleyway, filled with the arrogance of a man who believed the world was his for the taking. Kaelen stood 10 paces away, his silhouette framed by the harsh desert sun, his blade leveled at the prince's heart with a steadiness that was haunting. "Let her go, Jarek," Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a frequency that made the very air tremble. "You have the coin I promised, and you have your life. Do not trade them both for a woman who will never be yours." My heart stopped, the betrayal more painful than the blade at my side. He had led me here, sold me like a common mare, and now he bargained for the price of my soul. Jarek tightened his grip, his breath hot and sour against my neck, as he sneered at the man he saw only as a common thief. "You think a few gold pieces could satisfy the man who would be Sultan?" he hissed, before turning his gaze to me with a terrifying, possessive hunger. "She is the crown, the blood, and the seal. I will take her back. And I will burn this den of thieves to the ground with you inside it." In that moment, I didn't see a princess or a victim in the reflection of Kaelen's dark eyes. I saw a mirror of my own rage. I didn't wait for Kaelen to move. I drove my elbow back into Jarek's sternum, with every ounce of strength I had left, feeling the sudden, satisfying intake of his breath as he faltered. Kaelen moved like a lightning strike, a blur of motion and steel that closed the distance before Jarek could recover. The sound of clashing blades rang out through the alley, a frantic, deadly rhythm that echoed the chaos in my chest. I watched as Kaelen fought, not with the practiced, stiff form of a palace guard, but with a wild, desperate ferocity that spoke of a man who had everything to lose. With a final, brutal sweep, Kaelen disarmed the prince, sending Jarek's fine silver sword skittering across the stones. He didn't kill him. Instead, he pinned him against the wall, the tip of his blade drawing a single bead of blood from Jarek's throat. "Take your men and go," Kaelen growled, his face inches from the prince's. "If I see your face again, I will forget that I was once a man of honor, and I will show you what the desert does to things that do not belong." Jarek fled, his pride wounded deeper than his flesh, leaving us alone in the sudden, ringing silence of the red rock shadows. Kaelen turned to me, his chest heaving, his hand reaching out as if to touch me. But I stepped back, the memory of the gold coins still burning in my mind. "You sold me," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Kaelen's expression crumbled, the mask of the warrior falling away to reveal a man who looked utterly broken. "I didn't sell you, Elara. I bought his silence," he said, reaching into his shirt to pull out the locket I had touched before. Inside wasn't a lock of hair or a portrait, but a small, shimmering vial of sand that glowed with a faint, ethereal blue light. "This is the stardust of Amara, the only thing that can mask a royal signature from the Sultan's trackers," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't take gold from those men. I gave them everything I owned to buy you a life where no one could ever find you again." The realization hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't betrayed me. He had sacrificed his own future to ensure I had one. I moved toward him, my hands finding his, feeling the tremor in his fingers as he let the locket fall. We stood in the heart of the hidden city, two ghosts in a land of red dust, and for the first time, the horizon didn't look like a boundary, but a beginning. I realized then that my father's walls were gone, not because I had escaped them, but because I had found a man who was a kingdom all his own. We left Amara as the moons began to fade, riding toward the sea where the sand turns to salt, and the world opens up into the unknown. There would be no palaces for us, no silk sheets or gold leaf ceilings, only the vast open sky and the smell of the coming rain. Kaelen looked at me, a soft, rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth as the first ray of sun hit the dunes. "Are you ready to see what lies beyond the fire?" he asked. I leaned into him, the warmth of his body the only home I would ever need. and I realized that the greatest magic isn't found in stars or omens, but in the choice to stay. The desert remembered everything the living forgot, but it would never forget the princess who became a storm and the shadow who caught her. My name is Elara, and I am no longer a jewel to be traded, but a woman who found her crown in the middle of a wasteland. The wind will blow, the sands will shift, and the world will move on, but we will remain a story whispered between the dunes. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more tales from the 1001 Nights. Love is the only map that never leads you home, but always finds the way.